Welcome to the Long COVID podcast with me, Jackie Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Welcome to this episode of the Long COVID podcast. I'm delighted today to be talking to Lorna Nicholson, who founded PoTS UK, but also specialises in all sorts of other useful things. So we're going to be chatting a bit about this mystery condition of PoTS that so many people with long COVID seem to have suddenly become aware of, and a bit about breathing too, because it's awesome. So welcome to the podcast, Lorna.
Thank you for having me.
It's lovely to have you here. Would you mind starting off by introducing yourself a wee bit? So who are you and what do you do?
So the what I do, I seem to do many things, but my background is nursing. So I trained as a nurse. I worked in A&E, accident and emergency, for many years. I then went on from there to work in primary care. So I worked as an advanced nurse practitioner in a GP surgery. I now teach Pilates. I have a lovely class for people with PoTS, long COVID, hypermobility that's on Zoom, that's just brilliant. So it's using movement to help people on their journey. So Pilates is one of the things I do. I'm also passionate about breathing, helping people to breathe well, and helping to become aware of their breathing. So I've trained in Buteyko. I've also done some training with Radcliffe in terms of long COVID. And I also work as a SERPA practitioner, which is a stress-induced recovery practitioner. And that's very much linking the mind and the body. So why the symptoms? Why the fatigue? Why the fast heart rate? Why the breathing pattern disorder? Why is our breathing dysfunctioning? And we're working on a nervous system level to help people on their recovery journey. So that's a summary of what I'm doing now.
Fantastic. Yeah, it sounds like you've got a lot of tools in your box, so to speak. So PoTS, what is PoTS?
So PoTS stands for postural tachycardia syndrome. Postural means upright. So on the whole, people have symptoms when they're upright, but you can have symptoms sitting, and some people will have symptoms lying down as well. Tachycardia means fast heart rate. And syndrome means a collection of other symptoms are usually associated. So fast heart rate, fatigue, dizziness, stomach issues, and a whole collection of other symptoms. The O in the PoTS stands for orthostatic, but postural and orthostatic kind of mean the same thing. So we've dropped the O to become a little o. So that's why it's still PoTS, but it's postural tachycardia syndrome. So the actual definition is an increase in heart rate from your resting heart rate to when you stand up of greater than 30 beats a minute. And on the whole, that is a sustained increase in heart rate. On the whole, when you lie down, the heart rate settles. So many people will say sitting down, they feel fine, but as soon as they start to move, they feel their heart racing and banging away, and they can get symptoms of dizziness along with that as well. So the PoTS bit is the increase in heart rate, but it's kind of under this umbrella of orthostatic intolerance. So with that, you can get low blood pressure. So it's really common for people with PoTS to have low blood pressure as well. And then some people have episodes of what we call vasovagal syncope, where you might be standing up too long and your blood pressure drops. So it tends to be an episodic, something triggers something to make you pass out. And so all of those go together. So low blood pressure, fast heart rate, and some people have episodes of the vasovagal fainting episodes as well. So that's kind of what PoTS is.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of different things, as you say, and quite a lot of symptoms that are in common with a lot of the symptoms that people with long COVID seem to experience.
Exactly, yes.
Do we know why a lot of people with long COVID seem to have developed it? And why is it not more widely known about? Because I had never heard of it until recently. And I don't think that's unusual.
Yeah. So that's kind of two questions. PoTS has been becoming more known about over the last so many years. So I founded PoTS UK 2010, along with another lady called Susan Whitfield, who was the number one founder, I will say. But then I developed it into a charity. And the role of PoTS UK is to raise awareness about PoTS. It's involved with little research projects, supporting people, providing evidence-based information, which is predominantly what the website is all about. So over time, the awareness of PoTS has become a lot more in the forefront. And long COVID has increased that further. A GP friend of mine said she'd only heard of PoTS because of me, but now she said that it's just, there's so much more awareness of it, which is great. So it's time has made a difference. I have no doubt that PoTS UK has made a difference. So my current involvement with PoTS UK is I've stepped down from a sort of trustee role. I'm more in the background, mainly involved with information production. So I've got time to do all the other things that I'm passionate about. And then your other question was about why long COVID and PoTS. So I see PoTS and long COVID under a sort of this big umbrella of a nervous system that's dysfunctioning. So what we do know about PoTS is that there's a dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system, immune system, energy system, so mitochondria, hormonal system comes into it, and there's a dysregulation. So that's what we know. And when you look at the potential causes of long COVID, it's the same list as what we would talk about with PoTS and again with ME/CFS. So I see it as all under this one umbrella of a dysfunctioning nervous system. So in terms of what is the cause of this. And when you think about the autonomic nervous system, so everybody knows with PoTS, the autonomic nervous system isn't functioning correctly. But why would it not be functioning correctly? So we have really simply, the autonomic nervous system is divided into the sympathetic and parasympathetic. So sympathetic is our fight-flight response. So when we're in a fight-flight response, we are responding to a perceived or real threat. So if there was a bear in the room, then it would be appropriate for your heart rate to speed up, your breathing rate to speed up, your muscles to contract and get tight, ready to fight or flight this bear. But in our society today, there's not a bear, but often our body is responding to these threats which aren't actually there anymore. And often these threats are things from our past, so past trauma experiences that are held in the nervous system. And it's only sort of with time, these things start to show themselves. And again, with PoTS and long COVID, so that's the sort of autonomic side of things. There's also the immune system side of things. So with long COVID, there's a lot of talk about MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome. And again, it's common in PoTS, which is really interesting. So again, the immune system is very much linked with the fight-flight system. So when we are going to fight a battle, or if you think of an animal sort of fighting a predator, their hormones release, cytokinins is released, which is initially anti-inflammatory. So should you as an animal get injured, those hormones are ready to deal with the injury. But if that stress is persistent and ongoing, it becomes inflammatory. So again, with long COVID, there's a lot of talk about inflammation. A lot of people are super sensitive to their environment. They get triggered by allergens over nothing. They're sensitive to food. So again, this is all linked with the what's going on with the nervous system at the time. So all these conditions are a very similar kind of pattern that I see. So when we think of the stresses, I think of current life stresses. COVID itself, when you think of the situation, the fear that's been associated with COVID, the fear that's been put out there by the media, that I feel, has really driven sort of long COVID situation. And often the people I come across, their nervous system has been sort of in this sympathetic overdrive for a long time. So I've had people say, I've been in a state of chronic stress for years. I've been running on adrenaline for years. So when that nervous system is out of balance already, then you get all this fear. So it's a trigger for your body saying, okay, I can't deal with this anymore. Something needs to change. Something needs to be different. So think about life stresses. And then you've got personality types. So again, our own personality can become a self-induced stress. So you've got things, I asked this for all my long COVID clients, and I show them a little list. So these are things like being a perfectionist, being driven, overly responsible, a helper, want to do everything for other people, like to be in control, feeling a bit anxious, tends to worry about things. That's the sort of personality type that I see over and over again. When I show this list, everyone's like, that is me. But where's that come from? Why the need to be a perfectionist? What is driving that? And so all these personality types, what is the driver? They can be really positive, but they can be a stress, a self-induced stress. And then linked with that, it's what has gone on in your childhood. Where has this all come from? And even when we're born, and when you're sort of in the uterus, the stress of your mother will influence the nervous system of you. So if you had a really stressful, your mother's stress at the time, you could be born already in this slightly sympathetic overdrive state. And then as you go through life, other things will start to influence that.
That's really interesting that it actually can happen before you're even born.
Yeah. And do you know, even generationally, so things that have happened through your family line can influence the state of your nervous system. And often stresses, we think of the big sort of traumas, the abuse, the neglect. And often it's not those big traumas. It's, you might have a mother who's overly critical of you. You might have a father who's angry. Your parents might have just not given you the love and attention that you really needed as a child. Medical traumas, that's quite a common one. Children who've had a medical procedure, they'll be terrified, and that fear is held in the nervous system. And if it's not processed at the time, it stays there, and then it takes a trigger like COVID to show itself.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I've certainly spoken to people who have talked about, oh, I nearly died doing something or other, and they'd sort of worked out that maybe there was something to do with the way that they had or hadn't processed that trauma that had certainly contributed to what they were experiencing as a result of COVID. So it's really interesting, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I would say everybody who I've come across, there is something in their background. And most people have had a history of something like fibromyalgia, ME, post-viral fatigue, prone to allergies anyway, so tended to be overly sensitive, history of anxiety, history of unexplained aches and pains, back pain, all sort of indications that the nervous system is in a bit of sympathetic, is dysregulated, isn't where it should be. So there's a whole history there, and then COVID being the trigger to bring all of this to the head, to the surface.
Totally. And it's almost like it will manifest itself in different ways. So as long COVID, or as PoTS, or as any number of other things, or more than one, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And so it might be another person, they might have a chronic pain issue, but the root is often the same, but how it manifests is very different with different people.
And I suppose that sort of explains the wide variety of symptoms that people with long COVID experience as well, does it? Because it's a huge amount. And I mean, I know from my experience that I've experienced quite a lot of them at different times over the last however long. But there are people that have experienced completely different ones. I think, oh, I haven't had that one. I mean, never say never, but...
And what I will say is, this is all, that your symptoms are real. They are, there is a physiological response to what's going on with the nervous system. So all of this is subconscious. Your nervous system is showing itself in symptoms, things that haven't been dealt with. Your body keeps a score. Your body is knocking. What this symptom, what is your body actually trying to say? It's trying to tell you something. But are you listening to what your body is saying?
We'll be right back. I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about long COVID breathing. The fabulous Vicky Jones and I have teamed up to bring you long COVID breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID. We've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us. So we've talked about the symptoms of PoTS, but is it one of those conditions that's really hard to diagnose because it's got so many symptoms in common with other conditions? Is that part of the problem?
No, in many ways, it's quite easy to diagnose. So medically, they use something called a stand test or a tilt test. So really simply, a person might lie down for 15 minutes and have their heart rate, blood pressure checked. Then you stand up, and then every sort of 3, 5, 10 minutes, heart rate, blood pressure is checked. And that will give an indication of what's going on. So the tilt test is a more sophisticated way of doing the same thing. You lie on this table, you're wired up to a heart rate and blood pressure monitoring, and it measures that continuously. The table tips up, you don't do anything, you just stand there, and it watches your physiological response to being upright. So that's a sort of test. But some of these, so like the tilt test, it's mainly used to rule out other conditions which might be causing the symptoms. But it's also sort of, the history is really important. And the history will give you a really good clue. So often when you go and see a physician about symptoms of PoTS, that they will listen to the history. They might do a tilt test. They might do a stand test, putting all those pieces together, and then make the diagnosis based on that. One of the downsides with a sort of tilt test is symptoms vary from day to day. And you have good days and bad days. And some days your heart rate might be a bit more wacky than others. So if you have a test on a good day, then you might not meet that exact criteria. But again, looking at the whole picture will give a physician more of an idea of what's happening. So the stand test is something that you can do at home. So just lying down. If you've got a blood pressure monitor it, stand up, write your recordings, write it down. And actually that's quite useful information to take to a specialist So they get a picture of what's happening on a day-to-day basis rather than just basing a diagnosis on one test on one day.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because I'm sure we've all had the experience where on a good day you've popped outside for a short walk or something and you've met someone you knew and they've said, "Oh, but you look fine." And you've said, "Well, that's because today is a good day. Yesterday I couldn't leave my bed." So, that different symptoms on different days, good days, bad days thing, absolutely. I know a lot of people that have sort of diarised their symptoms. I keep meaning to. I started doing that yesterday. I thought, oh, I'll just remember it, but never going to remember all of that.
No. And there's advantages and disadvantages. For in the short term, to help get a diagnosis can be helpful. Long term, if you focus on the symptoms too much, they can sort of become more ingrained. So it's a bit of a balance with accepting the symptoms, sitting with the symptoms, but not becoming too focused on the symptoms.
Yes, definitely. I know I'm one of these people that likes answers. I had my counsellor having a go at me for that this morning, so which obviously made me even more cranky. So, assuming someone has got a diagnosis of POTS, or even thinks that it is something that they might have, how can people alleviate symptoms, and is there a cure?
So, good question. So the medical approach is medication can help. Lots of people are on medication to lower the heart rate, and there's medication that can increase blood pressure, and that does help. We talk about compression stockings, which are meant to be waist high. Now, to be honest, they say do this, but I haven't actually come across many people who say this really helps me, and they're uncomfortable, they're hot. So most people tend to ditch them, but it's an option worth a try. Some people do find them helpful. Increased fluids, so making sure you're drinking plenty, and increased salt can help if your blood pressure's low. So just normal table salt, just be generous with it. Don't be afraid to eat salt. Focusing on a healthy diet. Some people find a lower carbohydrate diet. So that's not no carbohydrate, it's just reducing how much carbohydrate you take in. So that's the sort of basic medical management, and also keeping yourself active. Exercise is challenging, so it's not go there and ride your bike, which I talk about this quite a lot. What do we mean by exercise? Often you'd go to a POTS clinic and they'll say, right, you need to do some exercise. So what comes into people's mind is, right, I need to go for a run, or I need to go to the gym. And you do that and you wear yourself out and you feel rubbish and you're like, I can't exercise. But when you break down what do we mean by exercise, you could break it down into you've got muscle strength and endurance, you've got joint range of movement and flexibility, you've got balance and coordination, as well as the cardiovascular side of things. So when I teach Pilates, it's all about working on the other components of fitness and exercise, but we take out the cardiovascular because that's really hard, but that's what everybody focuses on. And everybody says exercise, or I should say increased physical activity, does help. But other things need to be put in place for you to do that. And it's thinking, how do you do that and how do you achieve it for you? And what's the best way? Swimming, some people find helpful in terms of physical activity. So that's the sort of main medical model of how it's managed. I look at it more on the nervous system point of view. So looking at the stresses, what is the cause of the symptoms? What's going on in the nervous system? How can we work with the nervous system and influence the nervous system to dampen down the effects of the sympathetic nervous system? So that's some of the work I do with a SERPA approach. So thinking about what has been suppressed, what are the emotions that have been suppressed over years? Let's start to feel those emotions. Let's start to work out how we can bring the nervous system from a more of a sympathetically driven nervous system into a bit more of a parasympathetic rest and digest and calm nervous system. How can we get that balance a little bit better? And there are many tools that I use in my SERPA work. One of the really useful tools is breathing, which is one of the reasons I'm so passionate about breathing. And my interest in breathing came about because there was a study done a few years ago with people with PoTS, and identified that people with PoTS had a breathing pattern disorder, dysfunctional breathing. And I was like, well, what does this mean? What is this? In all my years of being involved with medicine, I'd never heard of this. It's like, we just breathe, don't we? I hadn't thought anything other than that. So it got me on a mission to find out more about it. And this sort of came off the back of, I teach Pilates. We talk about breathing in Pilates. I teach Pilates teachers about PoTS, chronic fatigue, long COVID, but something's missing in my knowledge here. So I went on a mission to learn. And the more of a mission I went on, the more I found it absolutely fascinating how we can use breathing, because it's a real link between we can't influence our heart rate, but we do have some influence on our breathing. So when your heart rate's going, your breathing rate will increase. You can't consciously make your heart to slow down. It just doesn't work. But you can focus on your breathing, which will then have an influence on your heart rate.
Right. So you can influence the influencers.
Yeah.
Way of putting it. So this idea of breathing, I mean, since I discovered on my long COVID journey that I had a breathing pattern disorder, which was probably as a result of COVID, but I'll never know for sure, I've become a bit of a breathing fanatic as well. And this whole idea of how the breathing influences everything is just kind of blown my mind a little bit. So would you mind just talking a little bit about what breathing pattern disorders are? We'll be right back. Hey there, I'm just jumping in for a second to see if you're enjoying this episode. If you're finding it useful, maybe you would consider sharing it somewhere, a friend, a group, or even on your Twitter feed. If everyone was able to share just once, we'd be able to get this information out to even more people who really, really need it. So please consider sharing somewhere if you possibly can. I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you so much.
So I see breathing as a bit of a continuum, with optimal breathing at one end. And then at the sort of extreme end, you've got this hyperventilation syndrome, which is breathing too much, too fast, taking big breaths of air in. And all of us are somewhere on this spectrum, and all of us can learn to breathe better. So a breathing pattern disorder is when symptoms are linked to not breathing quite so well. And it's interesting, when I looking at a list of symptoms of a breathing pattern disorder, it's things like dizziness, fast heart rate, feeling of not getting enough air in, fatigue, chest discomfort, feeling lightheaded, loss of balance. And they're all very similar symptoms to someone with long COVID or PoTS. And it's like, interesting, what's going on here? How much of, and the symptoms are usually due to a shift in chemistry of your body. So your carbon dioxide level is too low, which stimulates you to breathe too much, which then causes you to get rid of too much carbon dioxide. So that's what we mean by a breathing pattern disorder. I tend to see it as this continuum, and we can all move ourselves on this continuum towards more optimal breathing. So that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I never really considered any of this. And then when I realised that it wasn't just that I needed to breathe better, it was actually the fact that I was not breathing well had caused my body to kind of biomechanically change.
Yes, yeah.
Was quite a big thing for me. And in some ways I liked it, because it gave me something that I could work at. And I quite like a puzzle. I can sort of sit and work at something. But it's almost like, I think lots of people want to take a pill for something, and for that pill to make it better, and that's not something you can really do with this, is it?
Mm-hmm. So it's a real superpower. It's an underestimated tool that we have in our box in so many different ways. There's always a question, why the breathing pattern disorder? And again, if you're in this constant sympathetic overdrive, you're using your sort of emergency breathing muscles, your upper chest, your shoulders and neck muscles to breathe, which again might be part of why a lot of people get shoulder and neck pain because of this dysfunctional breathing. So these muscles shouldn't be used all the time at rest. So it's where the breathing pattern disorder comes from, why the sympathetic overdrive. And often it might be that you've had a particular trauma. It might be a one-off event which has kind of triggered that breathing pattern, but then the trauma's gone and it might be dealt with, but the pattern is still there. So there's a habit, and sometimes just unlearning the habit can help. For some people, the cause of the breathing pattern disorder, the being in the fight-flight response, is still there. So I've had people who says, I'm doing all the right things, but I can't seem to influence my breathing. The other side of it is, okay, what is the cause of this? What are the driving forces? Why is your nervous system behaving like it is? And unless you start to address that side of things, I think it's very difficult to actually really change the breathing pattern until we can shift ourselves into a better parasympathetic balance. So it's a two-way thing. So it's addressing the habit, addressing the mechanics of breathing, but also using breathing to influence the nervous system to bring you into parasympathetic. So what we do know is slow belly breathing will help you shift into the parasympathetic. So I think of the sympathetic being in your red zone, your parasympathetic being in your green zone, so the rest and digest. So learning to slow belly breathe is probably the most useful tool you can do to help yourself. Some people find that really hard. There's a lot of stuff out there that I would suggest in terms of what's on the internet with how to breathe that is, I would say, too hard for most people. And they try and do some of the counting exercises, 7 in, 5 out, and it's just too hard. So ultimately, working with somebody who can give you a clue with where to start would be the ideal. It's not always possible for everybody. So again, this is one of the things that I do, is help people, give them a few tools for them that's more individualized. But the other way is just learning to breathe well, slow belly breathing, steadying the upper chest, gradually slowing down the breathing, taking less air in as you breathe rather than taking big breaths. Most people with PoTS long COVID tend to take very big breaths in, so they're over breathing. So just reducing all of that, and that will shift you into the parasympathetic.
Yeah, because it's the two different sides of it, isn't it? And,
yeah.
And one will help the other, but you've sort of got to address both of them. So yeah, you were talking about low, deep breathing, not breathing in your chest, because I certainly found, to start with, that I was getting very panicky as well. In my initial illness, I did have some breathing difficulties, which could well have been what triggered the whole thing off, I guess. And it was just like my body thought it was still there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lower down, slower, and nose breathing was the other thing that made a big difference for me.
Yep. So nose breathing is sort of the foundation of good breathing. And why I want to breathe through our nose is it filters out dust particles. It's our first line of defense from infection. Your sinuses produce nitrous oxide. They are a vasodilator, so they open up your blood vessels and airways. It also, the suction of breathing through your nose helps get the air low, so down to the base of your lungs. So the best gas exchange happens at the base of your lungs. So if you're always upper chest breathing, the air you're not getting the oxygen all the way to the base where we want it to be. So that's some of the key benefits of nose breathing. And I will honestly say, I thought, I'm going to put this to the test. And the first thing is awareness of are you breathing through your nose? Most people haven't even thought about it. And when you do go and think about it, you'll probably notice that there are times when you are mouth breathing. So for me, with any sort of exercise, I would mouth breathe. So I've learned to nose breathe with exercise. And I'll honestly say it's improved my exercise tolerance. I've had clients who just by nose breathing, they've said, gosh, I can walk to the end of my street without feeling dizzy. It has made an improvement in my symptoms. So just learning to nose breathe, if you do nothing else, that's a really good start. I would suggest starting when you're sitting down. If you're a chronic mouth breather, just work on it when you're sitting, watching telly, then add it into a bit of walking around the house. And then when you start to increase your activity levels, most people, they go for a walk or something and say, I tried it when I was walking and it was really hard. I can't do it. So you just have to be kind to yourself and think about how you're starting and gradually build it up. And the more you work on it, the easier it will get. And also the more your airways open up to make it easier. There will be the feeling of not getting enough air in, but you just have to trust me that you're getting plenty of air. You're getting the oxygen actually more to where you want the oxygen to get to.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, we've talked a lot about breathing and how that will help everything, because it's awesome. Have you got any kind of general tips for people with long COVID and or PoTS that will just kind of generally help them, whether it's with calming down the nervous system or dealing with other things?
There's just a few things, is spending time being mindful. So being in the moment, stopping, doing what you do in a mindful way. That could be eating mindfully. It could be if you're doing some crafts mindfully. So being in the present, not dwelling on the past or looking to the future. I've had a client say that they thought they were being mindful, but when they really realized it, their sort of inner chatter, what's going on in their head was still going on. So it's just putting that aside. So mindfulness meditation. Some people find that being in the present quite difficult. So sometimes just doing the slow breathing, that's a form of mindfulness. Also thinking about beliefs. What do you believe are the cause of your symptoms? What are your fears? So beliefs are a big part of it. And if you can understand a little bit, why do you have these symptoms? Where are they coming from? What's driving them? That can make a big difference as well. And there are things that like gratitude. So keeping a gratitude diary at the end of each day, just look at your day. What are you thankful for on that day? So that's another tool. And that there's scientific evidence of its benefit in influencing your nervous system. So it's something really simple that will make a difference. One thing that I'm particularly interested in at the moment is wild swimming. So cold water exposure. And I think this is fascinating because to go in cold water, you have to control your breathing. It's really mindful. You have to be in the moment. There's loads of anecdotal evidence of the benefit of cold water on the nervous system, reducing inflammation. People who have depression say they feel much more alive. I've met a number of people with PoTS and other health conditions that the cold water exposure has made a difference to them. And I'd love to hear from you. If any of you have long COVID or PoTS and you have found cold water exposure beneficial, it would be really interesting to hear your stories. So again, it's another tool to influence the nervous system. There is a slight warning with that, is if you've never done it before, I would suggest that that there are people out there who will take you while swimming, so teach you how to do it properly and safely. There are risks with it. And I wouldn't start in the winter. It's something to do in the summer. But what you can do now is simple things like splashing your face with cold water. That might be enough. Having a cold shower. That's something that you can try that will influence the nervous system. So they're just simple, safe tools that you could try, and it would be interesting to see how you get on with that. But this is influencing things on a nervous system level rather than sort of cognitively.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, you've sent me over a load of links, so I'll make sure that all of them go into the show notes. So if people want to look up what you're doing or get in touch, they'll be able to do that through them, won't they?
Yes, that's right. So the easiest thing is to have a look at my website, see all the different things that I do. Send me an email. If you have any questions, feel free to email me as well, and I'll answer as best as I can.
Fantastic. So yeah, I'll make sure that all goes into the show notes. And of course, people can get in touch with me and I'll point them in your direction if they're stuck. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you and really, really interesting to demystify PoTS a little bit. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much to all of my guests and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/longcovidpod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch